how is that line drawn and why is that line drawn and who can access the other side of that line? Right now, that line is drawn based on purchasing power. And I think that is problematic from, both in terms of like, are we letting people, or does that mean that people without purchasing power can't access these communities? As well as just for the communities themselves, right? Like the people who have the highest purchasing power might actually not be the best community members. If you think about the like amount of engagement that these, or like the creativity it takes for people within these communities to like take initiative and say like, hey, I have this new idea, I have this new idea that can drive value to the community at large. That actually has nothing to do with how much money that person has. And it has everything to do with like their skills, their experiences, their background. And therefore, when we draw lines of who gets to access the community based on purchasing power, you're actually like, you're not actually like letting in the right people necessarily. Like those conditions are not necessarily the right conditions for a very healthy, very active, very dynamic community.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the Metaverse. Welcome to the Unstoppable Podcast, everyone. I appreciate you tuning in. We've got a great guest with us today. My name is Josh Gordon. I'm the host, and joined with me is Maria Shen. She's a partner on the investment team at Electric Capital. She's been a founder and CTO at a startup and has a master's degree in engineering and comp sci from Cornell. So she's got the technical chops to really dive into the code and the strategy experience to help build companies. Maria is also a member of the Bored Ape Yacht Club. So shout out to all the apes out there, which is an NFT community that's really taken the world by storm in the last year. Maria, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
For sure. I've been following you for a while. I think initially after I saw you in the Bored Ape Yacht Club with your NFT avatar, and then since then followed and read a lot of the reports you've written around NFTs, the developer report, and just kind of followed some of the Electric Capital investments and some of the portfolio companies. So I think that you have a lot to bring to the table from like your experience. And something that I think is interesting is when you're an investor focused on Web3 companies, like how you form that thesis and really stick to, that belief in what the future could look like. So I'm excited to talk through some of these NFT use cases with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to start off, could you give all of our listeners, a background on you and kind of talk us through how you got into crypto and what led you to wanting to invest really in Web3 companies?
Yeah, sure. So, I can just go chronologically. I studied political science and computer science at Harvard. And then after graduation, went to work at Microsoft for a few years as a PM. Just worked on search tech there, left after my product shipped and went to get my master's in computer science, mainly because I wanted to start a company and didn't know what I wanted to do. And so it was a good tactic to stall for time. And then while I was doing that, I started my company while I was in grad school and then afterwards worked on it. And this was kind of in the 2016 era where direct to consumer was really taking off. People realized all of a sudden, wow, you can use Instagram to sell directly to your customers. And if you wanted to have an athleisure line, you didn't need to be Nike and you didn't need to be Adidas. You could actually just create your own. So if you recall, Warby Parker really took off during this time. Casper really took off during this time. This is when a lot of people were starting their own Shopify stores and Shopify was starting to take off. And so during that era, the company that I worked on was effectively supply chain as a backend because these businesses were so good at marketing, so good at creating product. Anyways, fast forward to now having customers at small businesses in the US, UK, and Canada, and working with manufacturers in Asia and South America, Eastern Europe. And one problem that my customers kept running into was payments, because they had to pay each other across borders, and these were business payments as well. It was difficult for a variety of reasons. Just cross-border payments in general are painful, but cross-border business payments when neither entity has worked together before, because these were brand new small businesses, was especially difficult. And these manufacturers were used to working with the H&Ms of the world, the Nordstroms of the world, where they already have a credit line set up. These are relationships kind of spanning years. And so, payment was always incredibly painful. And I thought back to, again, like 2015 was when Ethereum launched. And so I knew about smart contracts. And so one of the thoughts I had was that the ability for smart contracts to allow anyone to write rules on top of money transfers or like value transfer is really, really useful, especially in this context where what people would love to do is to be able to release funds progressively across borders based on whether certain conditions have been met in the business negotiations, or like in the business deal, or like in whatever order that they had made. So I started looking into crypto through that lens, in the 2016 era. Realized pretty rapidly that it wasn't going to work for my use case. Fiat on-ramps and off-ramps were non-existent or very messy. KYC and AML was very messy. So the infrastructure was extremely immature. But, I think the thought is that infrastructure can eventually become mature, but really the ability to write rules on top of money is incredible. And so in 2018, decided to get into crypto full time and joined Electric then. And then NFTs was just out of my interest for metaverses. I'm really into sci-fi. One of my favorite books is Snow Crash. 2018, Decentraland hadn't really launched yet publicly. And so Crypto Voxels was the place where you could go to explore the metaverse. And so I spent a lot of time walking around in crypto voxels, and they were one of the first platforms to integrate with NFT platforms, so that I could see not only was the land, or were the land parcels NFTs, but also you could hang up NFT art on the walls. And so I spent a lot of time just staring at NFTs through that context.
Yeah. It sounds like, your intro to crypto, I would say, is similar to a lot of people who joined pre-2021. And that's from like crypto through a lens of finance. And something that I really love about NFTs is now how it's reframing crypto in not a financial lens, and so much more in an art or a creator and more of a utility lens. And there's like there's these two sides. And even within NFTs, sure, there's finance components, but there's a lot more uses besides just crypto as a means to send payment. So you talk about that start on the supply chain and then getting introduced to some of like the metaverse ecosystem. Was there an inflection point where maybe it's when you're looking at art on, a wall and in crypto voxels or something like that? Is there an inflection point where you realize that NFTs are going to have use cases that span across, all industries and different verticals?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I was familiar with NFTs because I was familiar with CryptoKitties, for example, played around with that. I feel like the use case didn't click for me when I was playing with CryptoKitties. Metaverses I thought was interesting. It was mainly just like, this idea that you can own things digitally, made a lot of sense in Snow Crash. And so, it was exciting to me that we could be feasibly moving toward that future. But I don't think, again, I thought that was like, hey, this is cool. I don't think it really clicked for me then either. I think just what really clicked for me was, when NFTs were first taking off in early 2021, even for someone who'd been familiar with NFTs and just playing around with it on the side, that kind of takeoff for NFTs really took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting the number of creators and artists coming in to mint NFTs. And I certainly wasn't expecting the number of people to buy NFTs either, because at the time, which, it sounds kind of silly now, even though it's just a year ago. But at the time, it's like, well, if you can't display NFTs, like, why would you ever own it? Like, where would you put it? Who would look at it? There were a lot of questions like that. And so I think when it finally, there were a lot of question marks when NFTs first started taking off, when creators first started exploring it. And so what I ended up doing was I interviewed a bunch of artists and creators. I literally just DM'd people being like, hey, I noticed that you minted some NFTs, like super curious how you think about it. Would you want to talk to me? I just want to know, like, hey, why, how do you think about pricing? Where are you getting your customers? Who's buying this? So I ended up chatting with a lot of artists and creators, just kind of like through this context. And I think what really struck me was the ability for people all over the world to suddenly monetize their work, in a way that just didn't exist before. A lot of creators who had just originally posted things on Instagram just to share, all of a sudden, like the hours of work that they had poured into, this digital artwork, as an example, could suddenly be sold and be owned, just like the physical artwork that they had, which, they spend an equal amount of time on both things. So it kind of makes sense that you should also be able to sell this digital work. But until NFTs, like, they just really didn't have that. And so that was really fascinating, like just being able to see people actually make a living off of this, like actually make, a significant enough amount of money for them to pay more attention to it, to like ease whatever like burdens they had, was just was really mind blowing. And so I think that, that really was probably the inflection point for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting how you actually went and reached out to artists who had started to adopt like the tech and get like kind of first person interviews. I hope you have notes on that, because looking back a year later, it would be kind of interesting to read a article on why some of them were starting to adopt and to sell, and to see how that kind of translates to what we're still seeing today. I think the NFTs is almost a good
That's a great idea, yeah.
Yeah, I think the NFTs is a good transition from how you started thinking about crypto from the finance perspective, because all of a sudden, I think NFTs have unlocked some of the ability to have the programmable money, to actually use the smart contract to send funds based on certain business rules that you mentioned earlier. But now with royalty splits and like secondary market sales, it becomes so much more of the norm than maybe it would be in a traditional business setting. So cool to see some parallels there too.
Yeah.
But you wrote an article called "The 5 New Frontiers for NFTs," and I'd like to walk through some of those frontiers that you've identified, and talk through some of the predictions you're making, and the belief that you have in how they'll evolve over the years. So if you're good with that, I'd like to jump in.
Sounds great.
So the first frontier you call out is called proof of patronage. And it revolves around NFTs as being keys to exclusive content and opportunities. And so I kind of understand from, the analogy of how crypto native forms of Patreon and Substack and OnlyFans are coming in the future. And, how you can just create these decentralized versions, based on token gated access and NFTs giving you basically access to different tiers of content. But can you talk through why this could be better than traditional subscription-based models, and why that's really better for both the creator and the consumer on both ends? Why do we need NFTs for access to some of the forms of content that we're really more used to in a traditional subscription type format in Web 2?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. I don't think NFTs are just like blanket useful for everything, but I actually do think NFTs are really useful for, the way I guess I think about NFTs, and probably from like a more engineering mindset, is that it's effectively like an open API that you can write against. Like everyone knows the rules of engagement for an NFT. You can, you can transfer it, you can buy it, you can sell it, you know who the owner is. And this is not hidden information anywhere, right? This is public information. And this information and the rules of engagement being public allows you to build against that. And so I think the subscription model works, fairly well in a one-to-one world where, hey, I'm a creator, I have some subscribers and they are going to pay me directly. And that's great. Like that's kind of a nice thing we've got going. I think the danger to that, which, some creators feel, some creators don't feel is the platform risk. So, for example, this is probably like the most applicable example that the most people have felt is when YouTube decides to change their definitions for what counts as an ad view, as an example. Like that impacts so many creators across the board in terms of what kind of revenues they're making. Similarly, so many creators, when YouTube changes an algorithm for how videos are surfaced, like that could make or break, that could significantly change the monthly revenue, for a creator as well. And so I think to some extent, the flaw in the one-to-one model, where there's one creator and then they're kind of interfacing with their own community is that, there's some amount of platform risk, right? And then of course, the greatest platform risk of all is if YouTube decides to ban you, if Twitch decides to ban you and you no longer can reach that audience through the distribution channel that you kind of spent so long cultivating. And so I think NFTs and crypto kind of or NFTs specifically creates this way for you to connect directly with your audiences, to get paid directly, right? With no intermediary. And so no one can cut you off and you actually know exactly who your fans are at all times because your fans are the ones who are holding the NFTs. Like it's not hidden from you. It's not a username that you can no longer access. So that's kind of like one set, which I think there's kind of like something has to go wrong for you to feel like this is valuable. And so probably for a lot of creators, like this might not be actually a very valuable scenario. It just seems like a doomsday scenario. I think the more interesting, like the non-doomsday, just like new use case model for why subscription, like NFT based subscription is interesting is that, again, because it's an open API, anyone can write against it. Like if you think about the way that memberships work today, I used this example with someone the other day, which is like, if you're a member of Equinox and you're paying Equinox some amount of money to access their fancy gyms, that says something about you, right? It says that you are, it says that you're fairly mobile. It says that you care about your health. It says that you have enough disposable income, or at least is willing to allocate a pretty substantial part, of money to care for your health in some way. So there's like a set of interests that it denotes. And there's like in some cases, it denotes like a socioeconomic status. In some ways, it also denotes your geographic location. And that maybe you're perhaps really close to like a city center. And all of those things are actually like characteristics that are pretty interesting, right? So like if I were running a smoothie shop, I might want to attract more people who are who are health conscious in that way, have disposable income in that way. And so the ability for these interests to kind of be shared through like denoting through like owning the NFT itself, I think is interesting. So like you can think of a world where if this membership were an NFT, I can go into the smoothie shop and like prove that I own this Equinox NFT. And this smoothie shop doesn't need to like, ping the Equinox servers. They don't need to talk to Equinox at all. All they have to do is say like, oh, you own this membership NFT. I know, like I can verify that you own this membership NFT. Therefore you did pay for it. Therefore you do have these characteristics. Like therefore, maybe you get a discount on your smoothie, something like that. This is like kind of like a toy example, but I think this is like widely applicable even in the NFT space today. We can see like crypto native ways of this emerging where, for example, during NFT NYC, there were parties where like, only Bored Ape members could attend. And that was held by like the Bored Ape Yacht Club in general. But actually it doesn't even need to be, right? There were also parties where, there were like 5 different NFT collections where it's like, if you owned any one of the following 5 collections, you are welcome to the party. And that party was not held by Bored Ape Yacht Club. Like that party was not held necessarily by any of the collections. It was just held by an entity that was interested in connecting with people who owned those things. So I think that kind of ability for people to compose or like to leverage that membership and kind of what it says about the person is an interesting shared way of working with subscriptions and memberships in general. And then I think lastly, like this is probably just cool. I don't know like how exciting it is as a use case, but I do think it's interesting is just the ability for you to like sell your membership. And that's not something you like right now you can only start a membership and you can like cancel a membership, but you can't sell it. And what's, I kind of think about like, there are like really exclusive golf clubs, right? For example, where it's like there's only limited number of memberships and you have to wait for a member to die before you can like become a new member before that like thing frees up. And so I think when you have systems where you own the membership itself, you can actually like sell that off. You can trade it. You can speculate on it. And so it kind of opens up a neat world of things that the membership holder can do as well.
Wow. There was a lot to unpack there. You mentioned a lot of different kind of reasons why this proof of patronage type of functionality for NFTs are important. Couple things I want to mention are, as you were talking about like the Equinox and smoothie example, it kind of popped into my mind on how for so long, just I would say in business planning, in city planning and real estate, and when you're looking to buy your first home, you pay attention to what schools are nearby or what businesses, how close are you to a grocery store, and all of a sudden in this like digital world though, some of those principles I think are still there. It's what can this give me access to? And the more popular that membership card becomes,
exactly.
The more other people like, but the cool thing about the digital world is you don't need to live near me to build something cool or useful for me to access. Anyone in the world can now build a service or an application or something really fun that I might like on top that my access card gets me, but now without those physical barriers. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a great analogy to the smoothie shop. It's just the smoothie shop has to be next door to the Equinox to actually attract customers. Whereas if you hold an NFT, you can go anywhere in the metaverse and access a business or a service. So, great point there. Yeah.
You see that happening in the NFT collection, like minting, process as well, where, we're starting to see cases where if you own a certain NFT, then you can, you can kind of be front of the line for minting a new collection. And from the new collections point of view, that's like a new distribution channel for them to actually like be able to market to people who would be interested in their NFT collection and kind of like offer a carrot, right, to engage with this new collection. And then from the NFT holder's perspective, it obviously just means like, hey, I got more utility out of my NFT. Like, that's awesome. Like, more utility is always better. And so it's just, I think it's like a fairly simple concept. Like, I think like 5 years from now, people are going to be like, why did we ever think this was like not a good idea? Like, why was this ever weird, for memberships to be NFTs? But I do think we're like in that discovery phase of figuring out, what it's useful for. And then I think these cases will just become so natural eventually that, it'll be crazy that we ever questioned it.
Yeah. Talking just on this idea of memberships, I want to bring up the topic of kind of diversity and inclusion, because the concept of a membership is it's an exclusive group. And I'd kind of like your take on, do you feel like this membership, the NFTs with limited collections, and there's just this massive focus on scarcity, Do you think that limits certain groups from being able to participate in NFT communities, or is what we're seeing right now around the kind of the membership and exclusive access really just more stemming from the fact that this market isn't big enough for it to demand, hundreds of thousands of people wanting to jump in? So that's why membership limits are set to kind of give it the feel like there's the demand. If you only make 10,000 and there's a market for 10,000, it feels like people want it. Whereas if you made 100,000 collection and there's only 10,000, all of a sudden it feels like not that many people are into this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's both. I think it's both, that, I think we definitely create scarcity to kind of like showcase the demand for certain things and to make people aspire to being part of the group. I think a lot of cases, like also smaller groups, it's easier to coordinate, it's easier to communicate, and like people, like it's such a primal, kind of like the monkey part of our brain that we want in groups and out groups, right? Like we want tribes, like we want, I think another way of putting it is just like we want a feeling of community. But the flip side of community is that it takes walls for a community to form, right? Like there's like a line somewhere to say this is a community and that is not the community for you to feel that affinity to that group of people. And I think that concept of exclusivity is not negative and not bad. What I think is negative and problematic, and something that I think the NFT space in general, like everyone should be thinking about, obviously, like myself included, is like how is that line drawn, and why is that line drawn, and who can access the other side of that line? Right now, that line is drawn based on purchasing power. And I think that is problematic from, both in terms of like, are we letting people, or does that mean that people without purchasing power can't access these communities? As well as just for the communities themselves, right? Like the people who have the highest purchasing power might actually not be the best community members. If you think about the like amount of engagement that these, or like the creativity it takes for people within these communities to like take initiative and say like, hey, I have this new idea, I have this new idea that can drive value to the community at large. That actually has nothing to do with how much money that person has. And it has everything to do with like their skills, their experiences, their background. And therefore, when we draw lines of who gets to access the community based on purchasing power, you're actually like, you're not actually like letting in the right people necessarily. Like those conditions are not necessarily the right conditions for a very healthy, very active, very dynamic community. And I think that's an evolution that we'll likely see and have to see. And NFT communities will be incentivized to solve that problem, because you're always incentivized to like, how do we attract talent? How do we attract the best designers? How do we attract the best community managers? And so necessarily, I think people will shift from like, okay, who can afford this, to like, oh, how can we let the best people earn a spot in this community, and how do we let them access this community? And I think that'll be a shift that we'll just naturally see. But we should, I think there is at this moment in a time, a problem with diversity and inclusivity.
Yeah. You totally make good points around how community is formed and how the money can be the barrier to entry, where it should be in certain cases the contributions and reputation you have within that community, which I think brings us to another frontier you mentioned in your article that I'd really like to touch on, and that's around on-chain reputation and identity. So maybe we can switch to this kind of NFT topic and talk through some of the predictions you have around that, because the identity you have on-chain in the example you were just talking about could lead to potentially being included in a certain community. So can you walk me through your thesis around like on-chain reputation and identity, and kind of how we have an identity in today's digital world, and how we could have an identity in the Web3 digital world?
I think when I first published this article, there was like almost there were like very few projects kind of thinking about things like this, and now there are actually a ton, which is really cool and really great to see. So yeah, I mean, the way that reputation and identity works in the real world is like, okay, you're given a name at birth. Like you didn't choose that, but most people are fine with that. I think that's okay, but it's a government issued identity that you have. And then, when you think about reputation, there's, you kind of like opt in, right? Like we kind of think about LinkedIn as probably like one version of our reputation, where that's our work reputation. We have different types of reputation, but like, as an example, our work reputation is whatever we decide to put into LinkedIn. We can be like, oh, Maria, like she studied political science and computer science, and like, she worked at Microsoft. And these are like lines that we can have. And then other people read those lines and make a determination on whether or not that's a good fit for whatever work that they have. So that's kind of how things work in the real world. And that's because like, when I work at Microsoft, no one's like writing that down, right? Like there's no like ledger that's just like jotting down like, oh, Maria worked at Microsoft, or like Maria, like, I don't know, went to college. This is what she studied. Like none of those things are like written in a place that's very easily accessible. But what's kind of funny about blockchain is like actually everything is written on the blockchain when you do something on it, right? So like when I decide, when someone decides to like mint a CryptoPunk, like that is a line that's just automatically written. No one opted in. It's there, and it's actually openly accessible to everyone. When you decide to like become a liquidity provider into a certain pool, that's just written. You don't opt in. Everyone just knows about it. And so this kind of reputation is just like floating in the ether in crypto. And, I think really what is really interesting is that because it's all kind of written down, that reputation is open for everyone to look at and for everyone to access. And so, again, as an example, if you were an early, let's say you were like an early, Bored Ape, purchaser, you kind of know, you actually can tell exactly based on the blockchain, like who was an early, owner of Bored Ape and who wasn't. And so you could theoretically issue an NFT to people who were early in Bored Apes. And you can call that group like the OG Bored Apes, right? That could be an NFT that denotes some sort of reputation. And you could say that like, oh, if you were early in Bored Apes, that means that you were into NFTs, around that point in time in 2021, that you were early in spotting a trend, and that like, maybe that says something about your judgment about NFTs. I don't know if it actually does, but like maybe it does, like someone can make that argument. In which case, like, like perhaps that group of people, like perhaps people who own that NFT that denotes that part of the reputation can access, either a new collection, or maybe they can be, or they can be like investment members of like an NFT investment DAO, and like they get special voting privileges. It's just kind of like the options are endless, right? It's whatever value you attribute to that action. But I think just the fact that like everything is published on chain and everything is out in the open makes reputation and identity, a much more public thing in crypto. And that is basically is just not something that exists in the real world. And so that's pretty interesting as well, especially when you think about like DAOs, and the way that they want to reward contributors. They don't need to track who contributed what. They can kind of like look on chain to see what happened. They can also say like, oh, if you were really active in governance in other DAOs, then you're welcome to our DAO because you're probably going to be a really active governance participant. And so all of these things are just like super, super easy to do in the Web3 world.
Yeah. I think it's something that us at Unstoppable Domains is thinking a lot about, and how you can prove and track the contributions you make on chain and make that more accessible to other protocols, other applications, decentralized applications, so that they can start identifying you as, a name on the blockchain, and then offer you certain, whether it's a promotion or it's an access, or anything that's really up to the creative imagination, how you can start offering things to people based on what they've done provably. So it brings up really interesting use cases, and it's good to see people are starting to work on them. Thanks for making it this far into the episode. I hope you're learning a lot. We just launched a new Discord channel last week within our server for the Unstoppable podcast. In the channel, you'll find a cool surprise. So head over to the Unstoppable Domains server, find our podcast channel, and check it out. And you'll want this password when you're there. It's podcast NFT. That's podcast NFT, one word. That's all I'll say for now, so stay tuned for more passwords in future episodes. See you in Discord. Now, let's get back to the pod. We could talk about the frontiers, the 5 frontiers that you discussed, probably for another 2 hours, but I'd say let's transition into some easier questions. I do appreciate the conversation around identity and reputation and proof of patronage, but let's move on to what I'm calling our 1-2 Web3. So I've got a couple questions for you. The first one being, what is your favorite NFT?
It's probably like the first art NFT that I purchased. Like I'd purchased like land before, but I never like purchased something by a creator. And this was an NFT I purchased because I interviewed that creator to figure out why she minted NFTs. I don't want to get her Twitter handle wrong. I think she goes by It's Val, like at It's Val on Twitter. And she has a collection called The Way In, which is just this like really beautiful photography collection, that she has. I think G Money actually purchased like her entire collection at some point as well, like early on in the NFT, kind of rise of NFTs in early 2021. But yeah, it's really beautiful. It has this, it's like a very surreal photograph of this woman who is like peeking into this, brand new strange world. And to me, that was really actually how I felt about crypto and Web3 and NFTs and blockchain in general. And so it just really spoke to me. And I purchased the piece.
Love it. I like how it ties into your early NFT story, and also it brings up a concept that we don't have time to dive into today around like the curation layer that's coming to Web3, and how you mentioned G Money bought this collection, a notable figure in Web3. I mean, that's a stamp of approval. I'd even say that Maria Shen purchasing of this NFT is another stamp of approval. So being able to see what people are buying and see how that can curate collections in the future is something I'm interested in. Another question I've got for you is, who's an influential Web3 creator, entrepreneur, investor, collector that's really inspired you or educated you?
I really like maybe Justin Aversano. Like he has a photography collection called Twin Flames. And again, he also was someone that I spoke to early on when I saw that he was doing a lot of NFT stuff, and, just kind of asked him like, how'd you get into this? Like, why are you doing this? And he's just, he's helped a lot of artists on board into NFTs. And he's also just like a really amazing, person at building community as well. And so it's just been really cool to see, how he's risen in the NFT space. And, I think his pieces are super coveted now. It's been auctioned off in like Christie's and Sotheby's. And, it's been kind of amazing to witness his journey.
Yeah, I really like the Twin Flames collection. I think that is a really great example of what an NFT collection can feel like, how it feels cohesive, and each piece is unique, but still part of something greater. And last question before giving you the chance to kind of let people know how they can connect with you and where to follow you online. In 5 years, What's the craziest thing that we'll be doing in the metaverse that people just aren't thinking about yet?
I wonder if in 5 years we're all going to be like farmers in the metaverse. Like it's, like in the sense that like we'll have unique resources on the piece of metaverse land that we have, and we'll be like utilizing that. We'll be mining that. We'll be farming that. We'll be like trying to sell goods and services. And so it's almost like a return to like a medieval cottage industry type of thing. Yeah, I don't know. I think that might be pretty interesting once everyone becomes like a landowner with like resources over a small patch, with ownership over a small patch of resources, and kind of what that means in terms of how that impacts our livelihoods, how we spend our time, and like what we put what we put resources in, like our time and resources in as well.
Yeah, I had a pretty similar thought to something like that recently, and I felt like it was almost too like pie in the sky to really think it was real, but it makes me think of like play to earn gaming, what you just talked about, and how you can play a game and earn some kind of currency or something of value through your contributions, whether that's like your time or actually like farming a resource in a game. And just like AI kind of learns, AI can learn by like taking thousands and thousands of iterations and being rewarded for maybe taking a step in the right direction. And it kind of made me feel like we could be moving towards almost becoming an AI if we're in these scenarios where we're playing games to earn something of value. We're kind of just iterating thousands and thousands and thousands of times over and being optimized to take the action in the game to earn the reward. And so I was like, oh gosh, are we becoming an AI if play to earn and we're all farming in like the metaverse? A little
bit of a dystopian view, yeah.
Yeah. I'm still here for it, but just a thought I had. But Maria, I appreciate the conversation today. Can you please let everyone know how they can connect with you and where to follow and learn more about what you're up to and the investments you're making?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at Maria Shen on Twitter. You can find me there. My DMs are open. Feel free to message me. And then you can learn more about the investments that Electric Capital makes at Electric Capital, as well on Twitter or electriccapital.com.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much. And, we'll be sure to follow what's going on from the Electric Capital perspective and what you're doing on Twitter. So thanks everyone for listening. Please be sure to tune in next week to the next episode of the Unstoppable Podcast. My name's Josh Gordon, and we'll see you later. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unstoppable Podcast. If something we said today resonated with you, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with your friends. And remember, this conversation doesn't have to end here. Tweet us your thoughts, ideas, or questions at Unstoppable Web. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.